There are stories carved in stone that you can see and touch. And then there are stories written on water, stories of places that vanished, leaving only an echo behind. This is the story of a city America built in its hour of need, and that the river washed away in a single moment. If you find yourself just north of Portland, Oregon today, you'll discover a vast green space, a quiet park, a racetrack, a wildlife refuge, a place of recreation and peace. But that silence is deceptive, because beneath this grass, beneath the asphalt and concrete, lies the ghost of a vanished city. Under this soil are hidden streets no one walks, foundations of homes no one lives in, an entire city wiped from the face of the earth in a single afternoon. This wasn't just some small town. At its peak, Vanport was the second largest city in the state of Oregon. It was home to 40,000 Americans, 40,000 men, women, and children whose shared story became one of our nation's most forgotten tragedies. To understand how an entire city could simply disappear, how a wartime miracle could become a tragedy, we have to go back to a time when the entire world was at war. December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The sudden attack on Pearl Harbor plunged the United States into the Second World War. A sleeping giant was awakened. The nation mobilized on a scale never seen before. The call went out not just for soldiers on the front lines, but for workers on the home front. We needed to build the arsenal of democracy. A war on two oceans required a bridge of ships. Thousands of them, liberty ships, landing craft, tankers, aircraft carriers. And one man heard that call louder than anyone else, an industrialist named Henry J. Kaiser. Kaiser was a builder. He built dams, roads, bridges. He was a titan who saw problems not as obstacles, but as challenges to be conquered by willpower and American ingenuity. His shipyards in Portland, Oregon became the epicenter of this titanic effort. But there was a problem. To build the ships, he needed men, tens of thousands of them. And they came. A flood of over 300,000 workers poured into Portland. The city was overwhelmed. People were sleeping in cars, in parks, in tents. The housing crisis threatened to stop war production in its tracks. It was then that Kaiser made a decision that would forever change the landscape and the history of Oregon. Kaiser didn't just build a housing project. He decided to build an entire city from scratch. On August 28, 1942, work began on a 650-acre floodplain. What happened next was nothing short of an engineering miracle. It was assembly line production applied to city building. Thousands of workers labored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, under massive floodlights that turned night into day. Walls were assembled in jigs on the ground, then hoisted into place. Everything was standardized, from the floor plans to the doorknobs. They battled the famous Oregon rain and mud, but they never stopped. This was their battle on the home front. And in just 110 days, a city rose from the mud. 110 days from the first shovel in the ground to the first families moving in on December 14th. Overnight, Vanport became the second largest city in Oregon. For a time, it was the largest public housing project on the planet. It was living proof of what America could accomplish when it was united in purpose. But Vanport was more than just rows of identical houses. Henry Kaiser understood that for workers to be productive, they needed more than just a roof over their heads. They needed a community, and he built one. Vanport had 7 schools, its own fire and police departments, a 150-bed hospital, a post office, libraries, and 5 movie theaters. It was a complete, self-sufficient world. But perhaps Kaiser's most revolutionary idea was childcare. With millions of women, the famed Rosie the Riveters, going to work in the shipyards, the question was, who would look after their children? Vanport's child care centers were unprecedented. They were open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. A mother working the graveyard shift could drop off her child, knowing they would be cared for, fed a hot meal, and watched over by a nurse. It was decades ahead of its time. The city also became a unique social experiment. In an era when segregation was the law of the land, Vanport was home to both white and African American families who made up nearly a quarter of the population living side by side. It wasn't a perfect world without friction, but for many, it was their first experience living in an integrated community. It was a glimpse of a different America. It was a melting pot. People came from all over the country, not knowing a soul, but they were all united by a single purpose. As one former resident remembered, "You came from all over. Nobody knew anybody. We were all strangers, but we were all in it together. The walls were thin. You could hear everything next door, but it felt like home. It felt like we were part of something important." This sense of shared purpose created powerful connections. Simple homes, but strong bonds. This shared experience forged ties that many would carry for the rest of their lives. They weren't just building ships. They were building a community. They were building a city. In 1945, the war ended. The nation celebrated. The massive engine of war production began to slow, and the shipyards fell silent. The Great Patriotic Migration reversed course. Many of Vanport's residents packed their bags and left. The population shrank from 40,000 to 18,500. But many stayed. For returning GIs, and especially for African American families who faced severe housing discrimination in Portland, Vanport was the only affordable option. The temporary city was beginning to put down roots. In 1946, to serve the veterans, Vanport College was founded, an institution that would eventually become modern-day Portland State University. The city born of war was finding a new peaceful life. It seemed its temporary status was a thing of the past. But Vanport was built on land borrowed from the river, and it held a fatal secret from its very first day. The secret was its location. The city stood on a floodplain, reclaimed from the Columbia River. Its only defense was a system of earthen dikes and a 15-foot-high railroad embankment. The residents lived in the shadow of the Great River. The winter of 1947-48 was one of the snowiest on record, and in late May, a sudden heat wave swept the region. All at once, the snow in the mountains began to melt. A massive volume of water surged down the river. It was May 30th, 1948, a Sunday, Memorial Day, a warm, sunny holiday. The city's 18,500 residents were enjoying the day. They were nervous about the high water, but that morning the Housing Authority issued a bulletin that read, "Remember, dikes are safe at present. You will be warned if necessary. You will have time to leave. Don't get excited." And then, at 4:15 in the afternoon, the railroad embankment gave way. A 10-foot wall of water and mud burst into the city. The siren finally wailed, but it was too late. The city, sitting in a basin, filled up like a bowl. The wooden houses were ripped from their foundations, becoming battering rams that destroyed everything in their path. At 4:30, the city of Vanport was underwater. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the city of Vanport was gone. In the chaos that followed, a massive rescue effort began. Coast Guard boats and ordinary local residents in their own small vessels worked through the night, pulling survivors from the roofs of flooded homes. But for many, being rescued was only the beginning of a new tragedy. More than 18,000 people were left homeless overnight. The schools and churches of Portland were hastily converted into refugee shelters. They had lost not just their homes, they had lost everything they owned, all their memories, buried under a layer of mud. News of the disaster spread across the country, but the decision was made quickly and mercilessly. The city, too vulnerable, too temporary, would not be rebuilt. For its 18,500 residents, it was the end of an era. 24 hours of non-stop rescue. More than 15 confirmed deaths, though many believe the true number was higher. 0 buildings rebuilt. By nightfall on May 30th, 1948, Vanport was gone. The land was eventually cleared, and the memory of the city began to fade. Today, only a few small markers remain to tell you that a city once thrived here. So what is the legacy of Vanport? It is a dual legacy. On one hand, it is a monument to American ingenuity, proof of what we can achieve when we are united by a common purpose. It was a bold social experiment in integration, far ahead of its time. On the other hand, it is a cautionary tale, a story of human hubris and of how quickly and completely nature can reclaim what we build. The city is gone, but its ghost still lingers here on the banks of the great Columbia River, a ghost that reminds us of the power that can build and the power that can destroy, and of the people caught between those two forces whose forgotten story deserves to be remembered.